Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello. Happy Monday to everyone here. Morgan Streetman's here, the star of the show, Pat George. I'm Roxanne Wilder. And we started out with a sad note today. As soon as I got in the car this morning, early, we hear what's going on in California. So we have another situation, another shooting that we're covering today. Not what we want to be doing any day.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what. It makes you wonder about all the security that they had there. I mean, none of this security seems to do any good. So
it stopped it pretty quick.
Well, no, but who stopped it? The guys with the guns.
Right.
I mean, the actual metal detectors that they had at the entrance
didn't do anything.
Didn't do any good.
Or the laws. Or the laws.
Yeah, right, exactly. The laws against it. So, I mean, we need to, as we continue to spend an earth-shattering amount of money on security at all these locations, we need to give some consideration to, what good does that really do you? If somebody's determined to do something like this, and I would have to think that would be the only state of mind that you would be into when you would do something like this, you would be determined to carry this out. And if you're determined to do it, the security measures that are in place just aren't good enough to stop it.
No.
In the sense of, a lot of this checking and think about the expense of having these metal detectors and all these people out there to wand everybody. And I'm just not sure it does us any good to have all that security. But it's a very sad situation. You got anything to add about it?
Well, I think the thing that you have to look at is the quick response by the police officers. I mean, a minute that took place before they were shooting at this person before they were shooting at the shooter. And that doesn't do anybody any good for those who passed away. That doesn't add any solace that they were apprehended that quickly.
I think we're never going to stop it. We're just going to have to live with it. And hopefully someday it'll evolve and go away. But as far as the deterrence, metal scanners and things like that, they're saying this guy probably cut through the fence or something. They'll find a way to harm anybody they want to harm. Somebody will.
Right. Well, thank goodness for the quick actions of the police, law enforcement who were there, obviously who were armed and were able to eliminate this threat within about a minute, you said, Roxanne. So that's pretty fast. I mean, think about if that had happened at Parkland or something, one of these other shootings where it went on for a much longer period of time. Or even the Vegas shooting that went on for, something like 10 plus minutes. Remember that?
Horrifying.
Horrifying scene. We still, to this day, don't really know why. We still don't have a solid explanation for why that occurred.
I'll tell you what's chilling when you go to Disney World and you see those metal scanners and detectors and looking through the purse and everything, and here you are, it's supposed to be the happiest place on earth, and you know why they're doing that.
You have to be reminded you're going through all those checks to make sure there are bad people doing exactly.
Very chilling to think that could happen there.
Serbia is calling me right now. That's weird. And they're able to break through my
I don't think I'd take that one.
No, I'm not going to take that one.
They're listening on WHFS.com.
You want to chime in? Oh, my goodness.
Well, if you are listening in Serbia and you want to give us a call, the number to call would not be Roxanne's personal cell phone.
No, please don't.
Instead, please call 888-404-1010. And, we've got so much to talk about today. I mean, it's a big week this week. It's hard to even think of exactly where to begin with everything we've got to cover this week. Of course, most of what I want to cover happened last week because that was Bob Mueller's testimony, and we've got a lot of that to cover for folks today. And I want to kind of give the highlights of that. That's going to take up, I think, most of our show today just because of the volume of different clips I want to share with people. But, we've got some important announcements coming this week, including the Fed's Open Markets Committee is going to be announcing whether or not they're going to be raising or lowering, and the expectation is they're going to be lowering interest rates. For the first time in, almost a decade. Of course, they had lowered them so far. They lowered them to zero when President Obama first came into office, and so they haven't had the opportunity to lower them because obviously you can't go, I guess you can go below zero. They do that in Europe with a negative interest rate policy. But at least in our minds, we don't see the logic of going below zero yet. And so they had to raise the rates a little bit so that they could again lower them, which I just find just fascinating, the way that they're trying to get their one tool that they have, which is increasing or decreasing the interest rates, which has kind of been played out, unfortunately, because they've overused it. They're kind of like the boy who cried wolf. They've cried wolf too many times, and now it doesn't work anymore to turn on the money spigots, or at least it doesn't work in the same way that it used to. But this will be a big week for announcements, including some U.S. payroll data is going to be coming out, some European announcements, and various things about how the economy is doing around the world.
And if you're scratching your head and saying to yourself, okay, why are they going to lower rates? Because our economy looks healthy. The reason is because they're doing this to sort of brace against a darkening global outlook. That's why they're moving ahead with this. And I would imagine that doing this will help our housing market stay somewhat stable as well.
Well, that's the hope. I mean, that's the hope, because we see all kinds of indicators that things are slowing down a little bit. And, of course, as we know, we're overdue for a cyclical recession, which we expect to see about every 7 to, I guess, at the outside, maybe 8 to 10 years. But, it's really more like 7 years, and we're overdue by about a year, I think, already.
The reason that we are overdue, a lot of people say, is because we just didn't have a bounce back. Those initial years when we were not in a recession or making the turn, it was a slow turn. Well,
speaking of slow turns, I mean, the UK is still trying to get out of the European Union, and they've just elected a new prime minister as part of that process. And they finally got rid of the insufferable Theresa May. And, I was reading some stuff about her, about how she was probably one of the worst prime ministers in the UK's history, just because of her complete lack of effectiveness at doing the one job that she was put in to do, which she embraced and said she would do, and that's get the UK out of the European Union, which they voted on back in 2016. Can you imagine how upsetting it would be to be a citizen of the UK and you voted for something 3 years ago, and it's just not getting done? Well, that now that Boris Johnson is prime minister, we understand, okay, it's going to get done by October of this year. So we'll see. But a lot of interesting things going on over there. If you like to watch the UK Parliament in session, it's quite a rousing event. Everybody sort of just speaks out of turn and yells at each other as the right honorable gentleman makes his presentation, and then the right honorable other gentleman will make a presentation. But it's quite humorous to watch. So I watched a little bit of that going on.
And I just think to myself that so many Brits have done everything, not those who voted to make the Brexit, but those who are fighting against it. They've gone every different angle they possibly can to stop this. And I can't imagine how infuriated you'd be if you voted for that to take place.
Right. Well, one of the things we want to touch on, too, before we get into the Bob Mueller testimony is, this explosion of discussion about whether or not there are rats in Baltimore, and what the president may have meant when he talked about a rat infestation in Baltimore. And, of course, the Democrats and the liberal media are always quick to play the race card. And so they immediately said, well, he's talking about the people in that district when he says rats. He's referring to African-American people as rats. I mean, I don't know if they said it that explicitly, but that's what they're trying to say. They're trying to play the race card. And the truth of the matter is he's not referring to African Americans as rats. The truth of the matter is Baltimore does have a rat problem. And what we want to bring to you is an interview with Baltimore's mayor from back in September of 2018 as she's walking around Baltimore. And you'll hear some of her comments, including that you can smell the rats. Now, this is an African American lady who left under scandal. But point is, she's a black mayor in Baltimore. Listen to what she has to say. Pat George, run the clip.
About a year ago, city leaders identified some of the city's most violent neighborhoods.
What the hell? We should just take all this down.
To target.
Ooh, you can smell the rats.
Under Baltimore's Violence Reduction Initiative.
Ooh, Jesus.
Just last week, we went with Mayor Pugh as she toured an East Baltimore neighborhood.
It's a new one. I've been down here 54 years. It's a new one.
Baltimore's Violence Reduction Initiative is about taking steps to rid communities of the cornerstones that contribute to crime.
Oh, my God. You can smell the dead animals.
Blocks of dilapidated buildings help to hide the addiction that's crippled this community.
So she said you could smell the rats, and then she said, oh, my God, you could smell the dead animals.
That's some good storytelling there in that audio clip, by the way. The news anchor's voice laying it out, and then you have all the nat pops with really adding the color.
Right. Well, be careful there, Roxanne.
Color is a term. I'm using it.
You can't say anything
Let me
anymore.
just tell you, let me clarify. Color is a term that you use to describe storytelling. Action is the way it moves along and describing the facts, and the color is the sights, sounds, smells, tastes.
Now, I'm with you 100%. I believe 100% in the use of language the way that we've always used it. But it's so interesting in this hypercharged environment that we're in, where anything you say can be taken and twisted around, right? Just the word color, like color commentary, and people are saying, well, what are you trying to say? Color commentary. I mean, we're into an insane time. So we just wanted to share with you, or I in particular wanted to share with you, the mayor of Baltimore, her own comments about the rats, about the dead animals, about the problems in Baltimore. This is not a racial thing. The problems in Baltimore are well known, and they should be dealt with. And hey, what the heck has Elijah Cummings been doing about it? We'll get into the Mueller report when we come back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder here. Pat George is here. And I know Pat George was busy last week watching the Bob Mueller. What is it? It's not investigation anymore.
Well,
the hearings.
The Bob Mueller hearings. Sure. There we go.
His testimony about his report.
Right, his testimony about his report.
Very frustrating to watch that.
So he was watching it, and we're both like, wait a second. What are you doing? Morgan's going to have all of the most important parts broken down for us on Monday. We're good.
Well, Pat, what did you think about it? You said it was very frustrating?
Very frustrating to watch it. What I took away from it is that I don't think he was too involved in that.
Yeah. Good point, Pat George, because, he did seem confused a lot of the time. And, one of the first clip we wanted to share with you kind of goes with the news announcement that just came out late yesterday. We wanted to make sure and draw your attention to. And that is that John Ratcliffe, the congressman from Texas, is going to be replacing Dan Coats as the director of national intelligence, which is the highest intelligence position in our country. And he's over all of the intelligence agencies. And so, we think that's a positive development. Some of what we've heard, and of course, it's very hard to know what the truth is, but some of what we have heard is that Dan Coats maybe was not assisting President Trump in some of these declassification efforts with some of the information about some of the spy games that were pulled on the Trump campaign. And we've covered them extensively here on this program, including the George Papadopoulos involvement. And remember, there are tapes of whatever George Papadopoulos did say to Alexander Downer and Stefan Halper, two of the people who were involved, who actually involved themselves in George Papadopoulos' life. But, there's a very good chance that somewhere on those tapes is what they call exculpatory information. And for whatever reason, it seems like there's been a series of federal prosecutions in which they have not wanted to give over exculpatory information, which is required under the U.S. Constitution, that the prosecutors give the defense all the information that might help the defense. And that might sound a little bit strange, but the idea is that the sovereign never loses when justice is done. So the state or the country, whatever sovereign we're talking about, doesn't lose just because an innocent man is not convicted. In fact, that's exactly what we want. So if exculpatory evidence would help somebody avoid a conviction, then we want to give it to them, because that is how justice will be done. Not by hiding exculpatory evidence and telling the jury maybe half a story that makes somebody look guilty. We don't consider that to be justice. So that's why you'd want to give over the exculpatory evidence, and I just don't know why they have not done that in so many cases over and over and over again, including the case against George Papadopoulos. But let's hear now from John Ratcliffe, who's going to be the incoming, well, assuming that he gets past confirmation, going to be the incoming Director of National Intelligence, and what he has to say about the standard for exoneration and whether there is such a thing. Because remember, Bob Mueller's report concluded that they could not exonerate the president. But let's hear what he has to say about that and the presumption of innocence.
Which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. Which DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Let me make it easier.
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Okay, well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it, including sitting presidents. And because there is a presumption of innocence, prosecutors never, ever need to conclusively determine it.
Ooh. I mean, that was pretty strong.
That was my favorite part of the hearing.
Was
right
it really?
There.
Good.
Right there.
Good. Well, I think that right there, that performance, I think we can see why Trump says, you know what? I want this guy on my team.
Sure thing.
I want him. Now, John Ratcliffe sits on both the Judiciary and the Intelligence Committees. Apparently, he's seen just about all of the documents that are behind the Mueller report, including a lot of what has yet to be declassified to the public. So we should remember that when we're hearing from him about some of these things, that he has more knowledge than even we do. But I want to keep moving here because there were so many interesting little clips and snippets. And I want to go next to one. This one is by Doug Collins. You know, he's one of our favorites here, the Republican from Georgia. He sits on the Judiciary Committee. And listen to him try to get Robert Mueller to admit something that we've talked about on this show many times, and that is that the words collusion and conspiracy are synonymous in everyday use. For the way that you and I and everybody else use the words, those are synonymous. Now, they may not be synonymous the way that a federal court would use them, but they're synonymous in the way that normal people use them. And now listen how hard it is for him to get Bob Mueller to admit that, even though it's in his report.
Although your report states collusion is not so specific offense, and you've said that this morning, or a term of art in federal criminal law, conspiracy is. In the colloquial context, are collusion and conspiracy essentially synonymous terms?
You're going to have to repeat that for me.
Collusion is not a specific offense or a term of art in the federal criminal law. Conspiracy is.
Yes.
In the colloquial context, known public context, collusion and conspiracy are essentially synonymous terms, correct?
No.
If no, on page 180 of volume 1 of your report, you wrote, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in the General Federal Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. You said at your May 29th press conference and here today, you choose your words carefully. Are you sitting here today testifying something different than what your report states?
Well, what I'm asking is if you can give me the citation, I can look at the citation and evaluate whether it is accurate.
Okay, let me just be clarified. You stated that you would stay within the report. I just stated your report back to you. And you said that collusion and conspiracy were not synonymous terms. That was your answer, was no.
That's correct.
In that, page 180 of volume 1 of your report, it says, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in General Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. Now, you said you chose your words carefully. Are you contradicting your report right now?
Not when I read it.
So you would change your answer to yes then?
No. If you look at the language.
I'm reading your report, sir. It's a yes or no answer.
Page 180.
Page 180, volume 1. Okay. This was from your report.
Correct. And I leave it with the report.
So the report says, yes, they are synonymous.
Yes.
Hopefully, for finally, out of your own report, we can put to bed the collusion and conspiracy.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that took 2 minutes to get him to agree to something that's in his own report. He was supposed to, I thought he wrote the report. I thought this was his carefully chosen words. Well, Pat George, how much time do we have? We have time for a couple more clips this segment?
2 minutes.
Okay, we got about 2 minutes. Let's get into James Sensenbrenner, because one of the themes was how confused Bob Mueller was. And boy, this really came out in some of the Sensenbrenner questioning. So listen to this one.
Let me begin by reading the special counsel regulations by which you were appointed. It reads, quote, at the conclusion of the special counsel's work, he or she shall provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination's decisions reached by the special counsel. That correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when a regulation uses the word shall provide, does it mean that the individual is in fact obligated to provide what's being demanded by the regulation or statute, meaning you don't have any wiggle room, right?
I'd have to look more closely at the statute.
Well, I just read it to you. Okay. Now, volume 2, page 1, your report boldly states we determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment. Is that correct?
I'm trying to find that citation, Congressman.
Well, it's volume 2, page...
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes, volume 2, page 1, it said we determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment.
Yes.
That's right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning. Bob Mueller doesn't know his own report. And I hear the music there, which tells us we don't have time for the next quote from James Sensenbrenner, but you want to stay over for this one. And we've got a whole bunch more quotes, including Louis Gohmert coming up and the coup de grace, which will be Jim Jordan questioning him. And you know, when Louis Gohmert and Jim Jordan start getting into Mueller, you know, that is something you are definitely not going to want to miss here on the Morgan Streetman Show. So stick around with us till after this break. We'll also catch up with James Sensenbrenner. And it's so hilarious to hear Bob Mueller question him about where he is reading from, because we come to find out that it isn't quite as interesting as Bob Mueller thought it was going to be, the answer to that question. So stick around. We'll have a lot more for you when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And Pat George, you were just bringing Morgan and I up to speed on something that's happening here locally that's really sad.
Yeah, I try to keep an eye on this so that they'll be first to know and you guys will hear this stuff. But apparently a lot of confusion right now in Reddington Beach. And the confusion is because in the water, 5 distressed whales have beached themselves right at Reddington Beach. And they've got all kinds of officials out there. And they even put tents up in the water right now to keep the sun off of them. So it's been going on a little bit. But
does it say
Reddington Beach.
What species of whale is?
It does not say that yet. Okay. It just says 5 distressed whales, but I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay. Thanks, Pat George.
Yeah,
appreciate that. Well, listen, we want to jump right back into the Mueller thing because we're not making enough progress to get through all the clips I got for you. So we got to pick this up a little bit. But, you know, it's so funny to me how confused, I don't know if funny is the right word, but it's noteworthy to me how confused Robert Mueller was. And, you know, and I just can't get over, by the way, James Sensenbrenner's voice, too, because I also find that quite intriguing. But anyway, as he's asking him questions, you can hear in our last clip just how confused Bob Mueller was. But here's another one where he seems to get totally confused in what is otherwise a pretty straightforward question if you would just listen to the question. Here you go.
There are 182 pages in raw evidentiary material, including hundreds of references to 302, which are interviews by the FBI, for individuals who've never been cross-examined and which did not comply with the special counsel's governing regulation to explain the prosecution or declination decisions reached. Correct?
And where are you reading from on that?
I'm reading from my question.
Then could you repeat it?
Okay. You have 182 pages of raw evidentiary material with hundreds of references to 302s who were never been cross-examined and which didn't comply with the governing regulation to explain the prosecution or declination decisions reached.
This is one of those areas which I decline to discuss.
Okay, then let...
And would direct you to the report itself.
Okay. Well, I looked at the 182 pages of it.
I mean, it's like trying to... The guy doesn't know anything about his own report, but he'll direct you right back to the report that he doesn't even know anything about. I mean, Pat George, wasn't that pretty much par for the course? I saw you kind of rolling your eyes in there.
Yes, that was what's so frustrating is like he wasn't there, and the repeating.
Right.
The repeating of the questions really bothered me.
Right.
You're not paying attention?
Right.
And when they read from the report, it sounds like Charlie Brown voices, adult voices in Charlie Brown to me.
Well, and maybe that's what it sounded like to Bob Mueller, too. He's like, wah, 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 wah. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Wah,
He
wah,
wrote
wah, wah. Now, here's something that really shocked me, and this is with Steve Chabot from Ohio. And this is one that just absolutely shocked me. Listen to this. Mueller doesn't even know who Fusion GPS is. Now, come on, guys. You know who Fusion GPS is. That was the group that Glenn Simpson was working with who put together the Steele dossier on which a lot of this whole thing is based. And Bob Mueller doesn't know who it is.
Director Mueller, my Democratic colleagues were very disappointed in your report. They were expecting you to say something along the lines of, here's why President Trump deserves to be impeached, much as Ken Starr did relative to President Clinton back about 20 years ago. Well, you didn't. So their strategy had to change. Now they allege that there's plenty of evidence in your report to impeach the president, but the American people just didn't read it. And this hearing today is their last best hope to build up some sort of groundswell across America to impeach President Trump. That's what this is really all about today. Now, a few questions. On page 103 of Volume 2 of your report, when discussing the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, you reference, quote, the firm that produced the Steele reporting, unquote. The name of that firm was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
And you're on page 103?
103, that's correct, Volume 2. When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with that.
Let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question. Right? It was Fusion GPS.
He's not familiar with that. I mean, that's one of the central facts at play that led to the creation of his report. But let's keep moving because Steve Chabot stays on this line of questioning about Fusion GPS and the involvement with Hillary Clinton and the DNC and the fact that Fusion GPS was working for them.
At the same time, Fusion GPS was working to collect opposition research on Donald Trump from foreign sources on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. It also was representing a Russian-based company, Prevazon, which had been sanctioned by the U.S. government. Are you aware of that?
It's outside my purview.
Outside his purview. This is a theme, wasn't it? Outside my purview, outside my bailiwick. Any questions he didn't want to answer, that's what he said. Well, let's see what happens when Steve Chabot asks him about that meeting between Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya, which occurred at the Trump Tower. But there were two meetings also surrounding that meeting, remember? Because first she met with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS, and afterwards she met with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. By the way, Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, those names don't appear anywhere in the Mueller report.
One of the key players in the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting was Natalia Veselnitskaya, who you described in your report as a Russian attorney who advocated for the repeal of the Magnitsky Act. Veselnitskaya had been working with none other than Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS since at least early 2014. Are you aware of that?
Outside my purview.
Thank you. But you didn't mention that or her connections to Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS in your report at all.
Outside my purview. Outside my purview. The guy with an unlimited scope for an investigation, apparently everything was now outside of his purview. And this type of hypocrisy just continued on and on. But you'll hear in the next clip where Ken Buck of Colorado is questioning him, you'll hear what the plan is at the very end. The plan is to try to indict the president after he leaves office. But I love what Ken Buck points out, which is the hypocrisy of the reasoning that Robert Mueller gives for not making a charging decision on the obstruction of justice counts.
The regulations concerning your job as special counsel state that your job is to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by your office. You recommended declining prosecution of President Trump and anyone associated with his campaign because there was insufficient evidence to convict for a charge of conspiracy with Russian interference in the 2016 election. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Was there sufficient evidence to convict President Trump or anyone else with obstruction of justice?
We did not make that calculation.
How could you not have made the calculation with the regulation?
The OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel, indicates that we cannot indict a sitting president. So one of the tools that a prosecutor would use is not there.
Okay, but let me just stop. You made the decision on the Russian interference. You couldn't have indicted the president on that, and you made the decision on that. But when it came to obstruction, you threw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what would stick.
Well,
and that is fundamentally unfair.
I would not agree to that characterization at all. What we did is provide to the Attorney General in the form of a confidential memorandum our understanding of the case, those cases that were brought, those cases that were declined, and that one case where the president cannot be charged with a crime.
Okay, but could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
You believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
Whew, well, that's the plan then. You can hear what the plan is because he knows the answer to that one. He doesn't know the answer to any of the other questions anybody wants to ask him. He's got to it's not within his purview or he'll refer you to the report. But on that question, the answer is an unequivocal yes, that's exactly what we plan to do. Well, listen, we want to jump right now into the Louis Gohmert because we are running out of time, and I had so much I wanted to share with you, so many little nuggets in this one. But listen how hard it is for Louis Gohmert to get Bob Mueller to admit that Mueller and Comey are friends.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, well, first, let me ask a unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to submit this article, Robert Mueller Unmasked, for the record.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. Mueller, who wrote the 9-minute comments you read at your May 29th press conference?
I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, so that's what I thought. You didn't write it. A 2013 puff piece in the Washingtonian about Comey said basically when Comey called, you drop everything you were doing. It gave examples. You're having dinner with your wife and daughter. Comey calls, you drop everything and go. The article quoted Comey as saying, if a train were coming down the track, and I quote, at least Bob Mueller will be standing on the tracks with me. Yeah. You and James Comey have been good friends or were good friends for many years, correct?
We were business associates. We both started off in the Justice Department about this
You were good
time.
friends. You can work together and not be friends, but you and Comey were friends.
We were friends.
That's my question. Thank you for getting to the answer.
So why was he resistant to answering that? Because he knows it looks bad, because he knows he probably shouldn't have been the special counsel investigating that if he had a personal relationship with Jim Comey, because that would potentially conflict him as to what role he was playing. Was he supposed to be Comey's friend, or was he supposed to be an independent investigator? Well, listen to how Louis Gohmert gets into the fact that Robert Mueller did not vet his team of experts who he's so proud of their work. He didn't do a darn thing to vet them. Listen here.
Most prosecutors want to make sure there's no appearance of impropriety, but in your case, you hired a bunch of people that did not like the president. Let me ask you, when did you first learn of Peter Strzok's animus toward Donald Trump?
In the summer of 2017.
You didn't know before he was hired?
I'm sorry?
You didn't know before he was hired for your team?
Know what?
Peter Strzok hated Trump.
Okay.
You didn't know that before he was made part of your team. Is that what you're saying?
I did not know that.
All right. When did you first learn?
When he did find out, I acted swiftly to have him reassigned elsewhere in the FBI.
Well, there's some discussion about how swift that was. But when did you learn of the ongoing affair he was having with Lisa Page?
About the same time I learned from Strzok.
Did you ever order anybody to investigate the deletion of all of their texts off of their government phones?
Once we found that Peter Strzok was an author of...
Did you ever...
May I finish?
Well, you're not answering my question. Did you order an investigation into deletion and reformatting of their government phones?
No, there was an IG investigation ongoing.
Okay, wow. We're going to get, yeah, you can hear that Louis Gohmert is building to something, and we know him well. I mean, you can hear the steam is starting to build up in the train, and the train is starting to move down the tracks. And when we come back, you're going to hear the heated exchange when Louis Gohmert really lets everything fly, and this was the end of his 5 minutes when he really gets into Bob Mueller. And then our out there is going to be the Jim Jordan questioning, which is fantastic. So stick around. You don't want to miss it.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder, Pat George is keeping us updated on the Reddington Beach situation with the whales. Very sad.
Dozens of people right now are trying to help what are turned out to be pilot whales, apparently.
Okay, and they've got Clearwater Marine Science Center out there trying to help.
There, yeah.
So we don't know what's going on. Why they're trying to beach themselves.
No, but they have 5 different tents. They're all right along the beach area there and probably waist-deep water. So we'll find out. It's a big story right now.
I know. Yeah. And big story, Bob Mueller, his hearings. And Morgan, we can't wait to get to your opinion on what you think about Mueller.
Well, yeah, you were asking me over the break, so I'll just tell you just briefly what my opinion is it doesn't look to me like Bob Mueller is really involved in the details of his report. It doesn't seem like he knows anything more than generally what was going on, and he doesn't seem to be very strong on supporting the conclusions of the report. In other words, he'd rather just say that something's not within his purview than really defend his report. So, again, it just tells me he was a figurehead in this investigation. He wasn't an integral part, and this was the Andrew Weissman investigation, as we've long suspected. And this was being run by Weissman, who's kind of a rogue federal prosecutor, does what he wants to do. But now let's hear Louis Gohmert get fired up about that, as only he can do.
Regarding collusion or conspiracy, you didn't find evidence of any agreement, I'm quoting you, among the Trump campaign officials and any Russia-linked individuals to interfere with our U.S. election, correct?
Correct.
So you also note in the report that an element of any of those obstructions you referenced requires a corrupt state of mind, correct?
Corrupt intent, correct.
Right. And if somebody knows they did not conspire with anybody from Russia to affect the election, and they see the big Justice Department with people that hate that person coming after them, and then a special counsel appointed who hires dozen or more people that hate that person, and he knows he's innocent. He's not corruptly acting in order to see that justice is done. What he's doing is not obstructing justice. He is pursuing justice. And the fact that you ran it out 2 years means you perpetuated injustice.
I take your question.
Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I take your question.
I take your question. That was his answer a couple of times. I guess when he didn't really have anything to say. All he could say was, I take your question. Well, now on our Out There segment, we're going to go listen to what Jim Jordan questioned him about, because here again, we've got a guy who comes off pretty hot, Jim Jordan, and does a nice job. And it's amazing to me that the Mueller report admits that Joseph Mifsud lied to them multiple times, but they didn't charge him. They charged all these other people, but they didn't charge Mifsud.
Director, the FBI interviewed Joseph Mifsud on February 10th, 2017. In that interview, Mr. Mifsud lied. You point this out on page 193, volume 1. Mifsud denied. Mifsud also falsely stated. In addition, Mifsud omitted. 3 times he lied to the FBI, yet you didn't charge him with the crime.
Excuse me, did you say one? I'm sorry, did you say 193?
Volume 1, 193. He lied 3 times. You pointed out in the report. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
I can't get into internal deliberations with regard who would or would not be.
Charge a lot of other people for making false.
I mean, that's what the whole report is about, is the internal deliberations about whether or not they were going to charge the president, right? Well, let's go on to hear some more of what Mueller can't get into.
Papadopoulos tells a diplomat Russians have dirt on Clinton. Diplomat tells the FBI. What I'm wondering is, who told Papadopoulos? How'd he find out?
I can't get into the evidentiary.
Yes, you can, because you wrote about it. You gave us the answer. Page 192 of the report, you tell us who told him. Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud's a guy who told Papadopoulos. The mysterious professor who lives in Rome and London, teaches in 2 different universities. This is the guy who told Papadopoulos. He's the guy who starts it all. And when the FBI interviews him, he lies 3 times, and yet you don't charge him with a crime. You charge Rick Gates for false statements. You charge Paul Manafort for false statements. You charge Michael Cohen with false statements. You charge Michael Flynn, a 3-star general, with false statements. But the guy who puts the country through this whole saga, starts it all for 3 years we've lived this now, he lies, and you guys don't charge him. And I'm curious as to why.
Well, we can't get into it, and it's obvious, I think, that we can't get into charging decisions.
When the FBI interviewed him in February, FBI interviews him in February, when the special counsel's office interviewed Mifsud, did he lie to you guys too?
Can't get into that.
Did you interview Mifsud?
Can't get into that.
Is Mifsud Western intelligence or Russian intelligence?
Can't get into that.
A lot of things you can't get into.
He definitely can't get into that, right? Anything that would be bad for them, they can't get into. The fact that Mifsud was a plant by the FBI to go out and plant this information with Papadopoulos so that it would come back to him, so they'd have the pretext, a false pretext, to open up an investigation. He can't get into that. But let's end on a happy note, though, because Jim Jordan ends on a happy note, and I was glad to hear it. And he's got some good news for us. So let's hear from him, and we can finally end these clips on a happy note.
Interesting, you can charge 13 Russians no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen, no one's ever going to hear of them, no one's ever going to see them. You can charge them. You can charge all kinds of people who are around the president with false statements. But the guy who launches the guy who puts this whole story in motion, you can't charge him. I think that's amazing.
I'm not certain I agree with your characterizations.
Well, I'm reading from your report. Mifsud told Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos tells the diplomat tells the FBI opens the investigation July 31st, 2016, and here we are 3 years later, July of 2019, the country's been put through this, and the central figure who launches it all lies to us, and you guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with a crime. Now, here's the good news. Here's the good news. The president was falsely accused of conspiracy. The FBI does a 10-month investigation, and James Comey, when we deposed him a year ago, told us at that point they had nothing. You do a 22-month investigation. At the end of that 22 months, you find no conspiracy. And what's the Democrats want to do? They want to keep investigating. They want to keep going. Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr's doing. And thank goodness for that. That's exactly what the Attorney General and John Durham are doing. They're going to find out why we went through this three-year saga and get to the bottom of it.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Woo! I tell you what, I'm looking forward to that. I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to find out why and how this whole investigation was started. Remember, it was started by the Obama administration, and it looks more and more, just like George Papadopoulos has informed us, that it was not started on a legal basis. They were actually spying on American citizens without a warrant and doing it in many different contexts. And remember, the FBI investigation wasn't supposedly even open till the beginning of July of 2016. But this had been going on for months beforehand. So the good news is that Bill Barr and John Durham are looking into it. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.